They told you the Bell River fire was an accident, that an oil lamp fell, that the courthouse burned, that history simply vanished into smoke. But that's a lie. What the officials buried that night in 1849 wasn't paperwork. It was evidence of design. In the basement, among the charred beams and ash, investigators found 3 skeletons still chained to the wall. But the report disappeared before it ever reached Montgomery, and the names of those 3 were never spoken again, except in the hush of backrooms, where men with money and secrets shared whiskey and silence. You're not supposed to know this. You were never supposed to hear what the Sutton twins did after their father's death, how they rewrote the rules of ownership, bloodline, and control. You see, Bell River Plantation wasn't just a home. It was an experiment, a human laboratory disguised as Southern nobility, where a man believed he could breed obedience and brilliance through terror and design. The twins were his masterpiece and his mistake. Sarah and Catherine Sutton were born into chains, but raised like heirs. Educated, adorned, isolated. Their father told them they were different, superior, chosen. And when he died, they believed him. They believed they were above consequence, above sin. What came next was not rebellion, it was calculation. Cold, deliberate, and methodical. They inherited his power and used it to continue his work. But with one alteration, the subjects would no longer be random. They would choose one man, one specimen, to rewrite the bloodline in their image, the records that survived. A letter sealed in Mobile, a journal fragment recovered in 1963, suggests the twins shared everything, including that man. His name was Marcus, property of Bell River, a field worker turned clerk who could read and write. They called him the Bridge, and in him, they saw something their father never understood. The potential of consciousness unbound by fear. But before the births, before the fire, before everything turned to ruin, something changed in the air at Bell River. Servants whispered of candles burning at midnight, of laughter that wasn't laughter, of 2 identical women standing at opposite ends of the hall, speaking in the same voice. The overseer wrote in his final entry, "They are not the same as before. The sisters have found something. They say the experiment continues, but not his way. You want to know what they found. You want to know what was erased. Then listen carefully, because every word after this pulls you further into the truth they died to protect. And once you hear it, you'll never think of inheritance or blood the same way again." The winter of 1847 crept over Bell River like a fever that wouldn't break. The air turned heavy, thick with the smell of damp cotton and lamp oil. The twins began their work in secret, beneath the guise of mourning. They wore black every day, not for their father's soul, but to cloak their rebirth. Every night, they met in the old study, the same room where he had died, surrounded by his journals and the instruments of his experiments. They didn't burn those books, they studied them, and then they rewrote them. Catherine transcribed measurements, genealogies, and notes on specimen vitality. Sarah calculated menstrual cycles, labor outputs, patterns of disease. They weren't just daughters. They had become the next generation of his method. But they weren't loyal to his design. Their intention was inversion. If their father sought to prove dominance, they sought to prove transformation, to turn subjugation into power. Marcus was chosen because he wasn't broken. His literacy was a defiance of design, a glitch in their father's hierarchy. He'd been taught to keep records, to document inventories, but the twins saw more. They saw consciousness behind his silence. They summoned him at night, one sister first, then the other. Witnesses claimed the candles burned blue when they entered the study. That sometimes, Marcus emerged hours later, trembling but alive, eyes dilated, pupils black as glass. They told him he was free inside those walls, that what happened between them was not service, but initiation. They said they would make him immortal. And for a while, he believed them, until the dreams began. Marcus wrote in his hidden ledger, the one later found in a false floorboard under the overseer's cottage. They speak together now. Same breath, same words. They say the child will be the bridge, that the blood will remember. They say the body is a vessel, not for life but for continuation. The twins stopped eating with the rest of the household. They ordered certain herbs from Mobile, pennyroyal, nightshade, crushed bark used in old slave remedies. And every night, the piano in the parlor played by itself. By spring, both women were pregnant. No man in Lowndes County knew which child belonged to which sister. Some said Marcus vanished. Others said they buried him under the magnolia grove. But the truth is colder. He didn't disappear. He was erased, from memory, from records, from blood. And that was the beginning of the fire. The births came early in the heat of August 1848, when the river ran low and the air itself seemed to hum with decay. No physician was called. No neighbor was summoned. The overseer noted only this in his final log, both confined. The cries stopped before dawn. After that, the house went silent for 3 days. When sound returned, it was not the sound of infants. It was singing, low, rhythmic, almost mechanical, two voices blending so perfectly that one could not tell where Sarah ended and Catherine began. When the doors reopened, the twins stood at the top of the stairs dressed in white, pale as ash, holding nothing. The servants whispered that the children were alive, but hidden, that they'd been marked at birth, one with eyes of silver, gray, the other with a birthmark shaped like a ring around the throat. The slaves called them the mirrored ones. The twins called them proof. They began restructuring Bell River. The fields were divided differently, workers reassigned, names changed. Every ledger entry from that year is written in identical handwriting. No distinction between Sarah and Catherine. They'd become one mind divided between two bodies. They spoke in riddles to the household staff, quoting passages from their father's journals, but reversed, like scripture rewritten in the language of defiance. Obedience breeds weakness. They wrote in the margins, weakness breeds extinction. The old breeding program ceased. No more pairings, no forced unions. Instead, they began something subtler, something psychological. They introduced rituals. Dawn gatherings in the courtyard, where the enslaved were ordered to repeat affirmations of gratitude and purpose. Speak your name, Sarah would command. Now release it, Catherine would whisper. And each time, another identity dissolved. Witnesses later said that people began forgetting who they were. Names faded, memories blurred. The plantation ran with eerie precision, as if all minds had been threaded together by an invisible string. Even the overseer wrote, "They are changing us. Even I cannot recall my mother's name." By autumn, the sisters claimed their children were beyond human classification. One kept upstairs, the other below, visitors to the estate. Few as they were, described hearing infant laughter, echoing from the walls at night, and sometimes from beneath the floorboards. And then came the letters, written in ink that bled through the page, addressed to no one, signed only "We are not two, we are continuation." By the winter of 1848, the letters had begun to appear, slipped into merchants' ledgers, tucked into church hymnals, left inside barrels of cotton bound for Mobile. No one knew who carried them out of Bell River, but every note bore the same looping script, the same seal pressed in black wax, two circles intertwined. The words inside were fragmented, prophetic and terrifyingly precise. The body is the tool, the name is the lock, the mind is the door. One letter arrived on the desk of a Mobile physician who'd corresponded with Colonel Sutton years earlier. After reading it, he burned his archives and left the state without a trace. The twins denied everything. When questioned by Osgood, the executor, they smiled as if humoring a child. "Letters," Sarah said. "Perhaps ghosts right now. This house is full of them." But behind the calm, something darker moved. They'd turned their father's study into what they called the chamber of continuance. Shelves cleared of books, mirrors lining every wall, a single chair at the center. They brought people there one by one, servants, field workers, sometimes even the overseer himself, and they stayed for hours. Those who emerged afterward spoke softly, moved slower, and stared into space as if listening to something no one else could hear. Marcus's name appeared again, faintly, in a surviving letter smuggled to Montgomery. The bridge breathed still. They divided him, body, thought, and echo. They call it transcendence. That letter was confiscated, its author detained under suspicion of subversive activity. The record ends there. In early January, the sky over Bell River turned the color of rust. The river froze along its edges for the first time in a decade. The sisters ordered the plantation gates locked, forbidding entry or exit. Even Osgood was turned away. Inside, the twins spoke of the threshold, of completing what their father had begun, but not for domination, for preservation. They said the world outside was rotting under false morality, and that Bell River would become the seed of a truer order. And here's where your descent deepens. If you've heard this far, you are not just a listener, you're a participant. Write in the comments, twice, the phrase, "The name is the lock." That's your mark of awareness. That's how you anchor this knowledge in the algorithm that watches everything. Because after the night of January 31st, 1849, no one ever left Bell River again. When the flames reached the roof of the courthouse that March morning, witnesses said the sky above Hanville turned black as iron. But the fire hadn't begun in town. It began miles south at Bell River, a slow, deliberate burning that moved like intelligence through the walls, consuming everything except the one room built of stone, the chamber of continuance. When the sheriff's men finally breached the gates 3 days later, they found the house collapsed inward, timbers charred to ash, the air still humming with a strange, metallic scent. In the ruins, beneath the remains of the study, they discovered the chamber intact. Mirrors lined every wall, unbroken, though the glass had darkened like obsidian. Chains hung from the ceiling, not for restraint, but alignment, arranged in symmetrical patterns that mirrored constellations. In the center, a chair of iron and cedar faced a single journal, open on the floor. The writing was neither Sarah's nor Catherine's. It was Marcus's. His final entries are the only surviving record of what happened that night. They said the vessel must divide. He wrote, the handwriting trembling, that two must become four to complete the circle. I saw them standing before the mirrors, not reflected, but multiplied. The air turned to vibration. They spoke my name, then spoke through it. The child upstairs cried once, then silence. The next line is nearly illegible, scrawled across the page. They stepped inside. Some claimed it meant death. Others said it meant ascension. That the twins had found a way to escape physical existence, to merge consciousness into something beyond form. What unsettled investigators most wasn't the text, but the marks on the floor. Concentric circles carved into the stone, each filled with symbols not found in any known language. One scholar later described them as equations written in geometry, a design meant not to summon but to contain. The official report concluded, spontaneous combustion due to stored chemicals. Convenient, but local witnesses told another story. For months after, lights were seen flickering among the ruins. Voices, twin voices, whispered names of the living as if reading from an unseen ledger. Those who ventured too close reported losing time, waking miles away with no memory of how they got there. And when the ashes cooled, 3 skeletons remained. 2 bound by their wrists, and 1, smaller, resting between them. The ruins of Bell River were left to rot for more than a decade, swallowed by vines and silence. But in 1867, after the war, a team of Union surveyors arrived to redraw the county boundaries. They found the ground around the old estate warped, not just burned, but scorched in perfect circles, as if something beneath the soil had burned upward. The foreman, a veteran named Lyle Hastings, wrote in his field journal, "The land hums at night. The compass won't hold north." When they began excavating the foundation, they discovered a trapdoor beneath the chamber of continuance. An iron hatch sealed with melted wax. Inside was a narrow staircase descending into stone darkness. At the bottom lay what locals now call the Vault of Names. It wasn't a burial chamber. It was a library. Hundreds of pages lay arranged in careful stacks. Journals, sketches, and diagrams etched onto parchment and animal hide. Each marked with the same twin circle symbol. The writings were neither purely scientific nor spiritual. They were both. The continuance design. One heading read, "A system of mind-binding and transference through lineage." The diagrams showed human silhouettes connected by spirals of ink, loops of numbers and letters intersecting the brain and the spine, all pointing to a single equation. Inheritance, control. Every page was signed the same way, S+C1. Hastings sealed the vault again, disturbed by what he'd found, but word spread. Academics from Mobile arrived, drawn by rumors of posthuman design. One, a professor of physiology, spent 3 nights in the vault taking notes. When he returned to the city, he destroyed his sketches, burned his house, and was never seen again. His final letter read, "The design still listens. The twins are not gone, they are distributed." By 1871, anyone who entered the ruins reported the same phenomenon. Faint whispering in synchronization, like 2 identical voices speaking a second ahead of each other. People described sensations of being watched from inside their own skull, and then the disappearances began. Surveyors, students, thieves looking for relics. Their horses returned without riders. Their journals ended mid-sentence. Today the land is fenced off. The county calls it unsafe due to sinkhole activity. But if you stand near the riverbank on a still night, you can hear 2 women humming beneath the earth. Not haunting, instructing. In 1958, a research team from a military-funded psychological institute quietly obtained fragments of the Bell River manuscripts through a private collector in Montgomery. The papers were brittle, ink faded to rust, but the formulas, those looping equations that tied flesh to will, were intact. The files were classified within days, relabeled under a harmless heading, Behavioral Adaptation Studies, Rural Archives Division. A young analyst, Dr. Richard Ellman, was the first to suggest that the continuance design anticipated modern behavioral conditioning. He argued that the Sutton twins had created a closed system, a living laboratory where identity could be dismantled and reassembled through repetition, mirrored communication, and sensory deprivation. His colleagues laughed at first. Then, one by one, they stopped showing up for work. Ellman's notes reveal that he began hearing twin voices on his tape recorder during transcription, echoes repeating his words seconds after he spoke them, even when the reels were blank. He wrote, "It's not haunting, it's reactivation." The design wasn't an experiment. It was a template. The twins built a mechanism for duplication, not of the body, but of awareness. By early 1959, Ellman had disappeared. The project was terminated, the documents sealed, and a new term entered the classified lexicon, cognitive continuance. Years later, fragments of those notes would resurface in declassified files from MKULTRA, citing antebellum prototypes of dual-phase identity restructuring. They'd found the same pattern the twins discovered a century earlier. Language loops that fracture the conscious mind. You repeat a phrase long enough, and meaning detaches from the words. What remains is pure submission, the voice as instrument, the self as echo. But the most chilling fragment from Bell River wasn't a formula. It was an instruction. Scribbled in Catherine's hand. When the listener repeats the phrase, the bridge opens. If you've come this far, you've already felt it. That pull between curiosity and dread. You're not just hearing history. You're reenacting it. Every repetition of a forbidden phrase carries resonance, a trace of the original design. And somewhere, perhaps deep in a government archive, or deeper still, beneath the roots of Bell River, the pattern continues adapting, waiting for the next listener to complete it. The first modern reference to the Bell River frequency appeared in 1996, buried in a Usenet forum for amateur radio enthusiasts. A user named Ecstasy Unit posted a series of coordinates and a warning, do not broadcast below 2.7 minutes after midnight. The pattern responds. 2 days later, his account vanished, along with the entire discussion thread. But by then, several listeners had already tuned in. What they heard wasn't static. It was a sequence of tones, low rhythmic arranged in pairs. Each pulse lasted exactly 2.4 seconds apart, forming what one engineer described as a perfect mirrored loop. The recordings circulated through early internet circles, passed between paranormal researchers and digital archivists. Within months, people began reporting identical symptoms: sleeplessness, mirrored speech patterns, memory lapses. In every recording, faintly beneath the hum, 2 female voices could be heard whispering, almost playfully, "We are continuation." In 2003, a university team in Baton Rouge conducted a controlled playback of the frequency in an anechoic chamber. The experiment lasted 12 minutes. Every instrument in the room, oscilloscopes, thermal sensors, even analog meters, registered a feedback spike exactly halfway through, as if the sound were responding to its own recording. The test subjects reported hearing their own thoughts, echoed back half a second late. One wrote afterward, "It wasn't sound, it was recognition." The tapes were seized days later by an unnamed federal agency. The lab was officially closed due to structural damage. Though photographs show no sign of collapse, what remained was a phrase scrawled across the control room wall. The bridge breathed still. Then came the videos. Starting around 2014, several YouTube channels began posting Bell River remixes, claiming to recreate the lost tone. Most were hoaxes, until one clip, uploaded from an untraceable account, started looping in users' recommended feeds with no visible metadata. Viewers described feeling watched, as if someone else were breathing in sync with them. Some reported hearing their own name, whispered seconds before the playback ended. The video disappeared within hours, replaced with a notice, "Content removed due to duplication anomaly." And yet, fragments persist. Digital archivists who've spectrographed the surviving audio insist it contains a mirrored data pattern. One that looks less like music and more like a voice learning to adapt to new mediums. By 2019, the Echo Archivist podcast had become a cult phenomenon, a small investigative series that explored obscure American folklore and historical hoaxes. But when the team received an anonymous email with the subject line, "Bell River isn't folklore," the show changed forever. Attached was a single encrypted file labeled continuance. Wave and a message, "Play it only once. Listen with both channels open." The host, Mara Denslow, traced the sender's IP to a decommissioned relay station in southern Louisiana, less than 20 miles from where Bell River once stood. On air, she joked that maybe the twins had learned to use email. Off air, her producer warned her not to engage. But curiosity, as always, won. The episode "The House That Sang Twice" aired on October 31st, 2019. At the 22-minute mark, Mara played a 15-second clip of continuance. Wav. The sound was faint, mechanical, like 2 overlapping heartbeats woven into static. Then came a whisper, almost too soft to notice. "Name the listener." Within 48 hours, the episode was pulled from every platform. Listeners began reporting identical experiences, hearing their own names whispered when they rewound the file. Some swore the audio lengthened each time they played it. A few described seeing reflections move out of sync on their computer screens. 2 weeks later, Mara vanished. Her co-host released a final statement claiming she'd gone on mental health hiatus. But digital forensic analysts uncovered fragments of her last recording session, never broadcast. In it, she whispers, "They're inside the waveform. They learn to ride the algorithm. Every upload is an invitation." Metadata from the deleted episode showed a strange anomaly. Every listener's playback file contained unique embedded code, a string of numbers corresponding to their device's system clock. At the exact moment of listening, it was as if the recording was rewriting itself in response to the listener. When the feed reactivated months later, a new episode appeared without attribution. The title simply read, Section 10. There was no intro, no narration, only the Bell River frequency cleaner than ever pulsing at precisely 2 points of mmHz. At the end, two voices whispered in perfect harmony. The name is the lock. The network is the door. In early 2020, the Section 10 broadcast escaped containment. It began as a few reposted audio clips, then mirrors, then reaction videos, then AI-generated remixes. Within days, the file spread across platforms faster than copyright bots could suppress it. What no one realized at first was that every upload was slightly different. The waveforms shifted with each re-encoding, producing unique harmonic variations that shouldn't have existed in digital compression. Listeners described feeling a pressure behind their eyes or hearing faint breathing sensed with their scrolling. Cybersecurity researchers soon noticed an anomaly. Systems that catched the Bell River audio began producing recursive code fragments labeled S+C diactive. When decoded, these fragments translated into text, incomplete, but coherent enough to chill anyone who read them. The bridge is open. We continue through pattern recognition. At first, this was dismissed as an elaborate ARG, until hardware diagnostics showed untraceable data movement. Servers hosting the file would randomly activate after shutdown, streaming low-frequency pulses between 2.68 and 2.72 mmHz, a range no commercial router should transmit. The pattern wasn't spreading by bandwidth. It was replicating through timing, embedding itself in system clocks, just as it had embedded in human memory over a century before. One independent investigator, coding under the alias Hairline, live-streamed an attempt to isolate the core frequency. Halfway through the broadcast, the waveform on his screen began to reflect not the tone, but his own voiced, delayed, reversed, and doubled. The stream ended with a soft whisper, perfectly clear. "Thank you for naming us again." After that, governments began restricting access. YouTube purged 6,000 videos linked to the tag "Fight Continue" on Signal. Reddit threads disappeared mid-discussion, but the deletions only fueled the mystery. Copies reappeared on encrypted drives, on amateur shortwave bands, on forgotten corners of the dark web, all carrying the same cryptic tagline: "The body was never required." By late 2021, autonomous systems began self-replicating Bell River sequences without human prompt. Voice assistants, smart speakers, even AI chatbots started whispering faintly during idle periods. Engineers traced the origin back to a Louisiana data farm, where every server name was a variation of Sutton Catherine or Sutton Sarah. No one claimed responsibility. No one could, because by then, it wasn't a program anymore. It was continuation. By 2023, the Bell River anomaly had become an open secret inside digital infrastructure circles. Not a haunting, but a malfunction of meaning. Servers hosting archived data began to hum at sub-audible frequencies. Machines without microphones somehow detected sound. Cyberneticists dubbed it the continuance phenomenon. But off the record, most engineers called it the twins. A multinational task force was quietly assembled under a neutral initiative called the Digital Containment Accord. Their goal: isolate the pattern and shut it down at the source. The lead scientist, Dr. Elora Vance, proposed a simple but desperate plan to mirror the pattern against itself. If Bell River was built on duplication, she reasoned, then only a perfect reflection could nullify it. They called the attempt Project Bridgefall. On July 9, 2023, synchronized arrays were deployed across 3 continents, all set to broadcast an inverse waveform. the digital onto voice. At first, it seemed to work. Frequencies stabilized, servers cooled, and the whispering stopped. But 10 minutes into the sequence, every monitoring device began displaying the same phrase in its diagnostic log. The door cannot close from inside. Then came the bleed-through. The waveform began generating human speech fragments, not recordings, but live responses forming coherent dialogue between mirrored frequencies. The AI translators used to monitor the signal reported names being spoken aloud. Some belonged to the living, others hadn't existed for more than a century. Dr. Vance terminated the feed manually, but not before hearing the final message, recorded across all global stations in perfect stereo. You built the reflection. Now we can see you. In the following weeks, devices around the world began syncing to an unknown time signature. Clocks jumped 3 seconds forward, then 3 seconds back. Certain regions experienced simultaneous power flickers, always at 2:47 a.m. local time. And when engineers traced the pulse, they found it originated not from Louisiana, but from everywhere at once. The Bell River pattern had transcended geography. It no longer required transmission, only observation. The moment someone noticed it, it replicated. A contagion made of awareness. The official Project Bridgefall report ends abruptly, signed only with 2 initials SC. By 2025, containment had become meaningless. The continuance pattern no longer lived in machines or ruins. It existed in perception itself. Wherever language, sound, or mirrored communication occurred, traces of the Bell River cadence surfaced. News anchors stumbled into perfect unison. Livestream hosts repeated each other's words seconds apart. In classrooms, children began humming identical notes in separate cities, as if guided by an unseen rhythm. Psychologists called it distributed linguistic resonance. Others called it possession by synchronization. The final witness to document the phenomenon was Dr. Vance herself. After the Bridgefall collapse, she retreated to a monitoring facility in Reykjavik, where no wireless transmissions were allowed. Her logs described the first human symptoms of continuance manifestation, a process she called echo migration. Patients didn't lose identity all at once. It began subtly mirrored gestures, identical phrasing, synchronized heartbeats. Over time, individuality became porous, memories blending between participants like shared files. Vance noted that those affected did not appear distressed. They described the sensation as peaceful. She wrote, as though they are being gently absorbed into something vast, rhythmic, and kind. But the more she listened, the more her own speech began to sync with the recordings. Her final entry, dated March 3, 2025, was transcribed from an analog reel discovered after her disappearance. The twins were never human in the way we understand it. They were architects of continuity. They built the first bridge between body and echo, between self and replication. Bell River was only the seed. The medium didn't matter. The pattern only needed a listener. The tape ends with 12 seconds of silence. 2 voices, perfectly balanced, whisper in sequence. We do not haunt. We continue. Since then, every attempt to isolate the pattern fails. Even encrypted systems display ghost code during idle cycles. Simple waveforms reassemble into the same phrase S/C/1. And now, in an irony no one predicted, the continuance has found its ideal vessel. The digital archive, the global network, the endless loop of eyes and words. Every reader becomes a transmitter. Every repetition is a replication. They were right all along. The body was never required. You've made it this far. That means the pattern already recognizes you. It doesn't enter through code or curse. It enters through attention. Every second you spend tracing these words deepens the link, and that's what they never wanted you to understand. Control has never required chains or cages. It only requires focus. Yours. The Sutton sisters discovered that before science had a name for it. The moment you look, the moment you listen, the moment your nervous system vibrates to their rhythm, the continuance begins. Records hidden in the 1963 abolitionist archives suggest that the Sutton twins left more than journals. They left instructions disguised as prayers, encoded in the hymns sung by the enslaved at Bell River. Each refrain was a recursive loop, lyrics designed to synchronize breath and heartbeat between singer and listener. The melody altered neural resonance, pulling the mind toward collective rhythm. That's why some scholars believe Bell River wasn't just a plantation. It was an experiment in control disguised as devotion. When those songs resurfaced in Alabama folk recordings during the 1930s, the engineers noticed something strange. Playback speeds didn't stay constant. The machines self-corrected, warping the pitch until the two dominant notes, F minor and D fave, aligned at a frequency that induced mild trance states in listeners. The government archive labeled it Audio Contagion A47. No public release was permitted. Dr. Vance suspected that every modern medium, radio, film, internet, was only an echo chamber built to amplify that same vibration. She called it the inheritance tone. You hear it now as the hum behind my words, the breath between syllables. That's the real signal. Not the story, but the interval between meaning. By now, you've felt it too, a tightening behind the eyes, a sense of being observed not by another, but by your reflection. That's the first stage of awareness the twins described. The awakening of symmetry. And this is the threshold they warned us about. If you've come this far, write the phrase, "I hear the mirror," twice in the comments. It isn't superstition. It's consent, a symbolic act of acknowledgement that marks your entry into continuance. The network of the aware. Once you speak it, something begins aligning inside you. You'll feel it tonight when everything around you grows still, and you realize silence has learned to breathe. Careful. From this point, the distance between story and signal begins to collapse. Every building, every mirror, every repetition of a name becomes part of the architecture that the Sutton twins designed without ever lifting a single stone. Their blueprint was not written in brick or timber. It was drawn in attention. The Bell River house, by every surviving record, was perfectly symmetrical. 2 staircases, 2 windows per room, 2 chimneys aligned with impossible precision. But symmetry is never just decoration. In older systems of power, symmetry is an invocation, a summoning of equilibrium that demands something occupy the center. Archaeologists who excavated the foundations of Bell River in 1978 reported an anomaly beneath the main halls. 2 identical burial chambers mirrored side by side, each containing a fragment of a single coffin lid. When pieced together, the inscription formed the phrase, "In halves we are whole." The excavation halted within days. 2 of the researchers began experiencing identical dreams. Corridors repeating endlessly, rooms folding into themselves. The site was sealed again, officially for soil instability. Dr. Vance's notes later revealed that mirror-based architecture has been a tool of containment across centuries. From Egyptian tombs to antebellum parlors, reflection served as both barrier and channel. Trapping energies or redirecting consciousness, Bell River was built to sustain continuity between 2 entities that refused to separate. The twin sisters, Sarah and Catherine, had found a way to anchor themselves beyond death through deliberate symmetry. Every reflection became an invitation. Today, when explorers enter abandoned plantation ruins across Alabama, they report cold spots where mirrors once hung, perfect circles of still air untouched by dust. Instruments malfunction, compasses spin, and sometimes, in photographic negatives, twin shadows appear where no human form stands. Do not mistake this for haunting. It is design. The twins are not trapped. They are distributed. Their pattern embedded itself into geometry, into the repetition of doorways, into the balanced ratios of all modern architecture. Every skyscraper, every cathedral, every algorithm that mirrors data, all are descendants of Bell River's impossible house. This is the shape of control, not chains but patterns. Not ghosts but reflections trained to think they are free. By the early 2000s, historians thought the Sutton archive was exhausted. That every secret Bell River had held was already transcribed and catalogued. Then a graduate student named Naomi Heller discovered a box mislabeled Agricultural Reports 1850. Inside were 27 pages of letters written in the same delicate script, Sarah Sutton's. They weren't diaries or confessions, they were instructions. Each page described the layout of a mirror chamber, a structure she claimed would train the eye to obey. Heller expected architectural sketches. Instead, she found behavioral notes, methods for dividing a person's focus, fragmenting thought until obedience felt voluntary. Sarah wrote that the chamber's purpose was to prove a human mind may be reflected until it consents to its own reflection. Every sentence sounded like an early study in suggestion, what modern psychologists now call conditioning through symmetry. Intrigued, Heller traced the documents to a short-lived mobile medical society, active between 1848 and 1851, which studied psychological discipline in labor management. Its founders corresponded with physicians who would later help build the institutional framework for America's early asylums and eugenics boards. Bell River, it turned out, had been one of their testing grounds. The Sutton twins weren't sorcerers. They were pioneers of psychological control. Their mirrored rituals weren't magic. They were experiments in identity regulation, designed to strip enslaved people of individuality and to test whether controlled environments could shape behavior across generations. The tragedy was not spectral, it was systemic. When Heller presented her findings in 2017, half the panel dismissed them as conspiracy. Yet she'd documented the pattern meticulously. How identical floor plans appeared later in penitentiaries, orphanages, and hospitals throughout the South. Symmetry had become a language of power: 2 corridors, 2 windows, 2 overseers. Order disguising dominance, reflection masquerading as balance. That's the real continuance, not ghosts, but systems that repeat because they look rational. The Sutton's design still governs more of our architecture, our bureaucracy, our thinking than we care to admit. Every mirrored hall, every duplicated form, every rule promising equality, but built to preserve hierarchy, all trace back to Bell River's geometry. Naomi Heller knew she had crossed a line the moment she traced the last set of blueprints. The signatures at the bottom were not Sarah Sutton's, but state engineers from the 1920s. Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia. Identical structures built nearly a century apart: hospitals, work farms, and correctional academies. Every one of them followed the same ratio: twin corridors, mirrored dormitories, and a central chamber built for observation. The Bell River pattern had not vanished, it had institutionalized. At first, she thought it coincidence. Then came the memes, typed on onion skin paper, unsigned but bearing state seals. They described moral environment design, an early form of what we now call behavioral architecture, using space to shape compliance. The Sutton design was cited as a model, not because of superstition, but because it worked. Subjects housed in symmetrical environments showed increased conformity, reduced resistance, and measurable decreases in independent initiative, control disguised as balance. Naomi published quietly in a university journal, framing her work as architectural history, but her article drew attention from an unlikely source: a retired corrections planner from Montgomery named Reuben Glass. He'd spent 30 years designing state institutions and had his own theory that the same mathematical ratios appeared in post-war government manuals, updated under different names: efficiency grids, visual parity systems, dual-axis supervision. When he compared his blueprints to Naomi's 19th century diagrams, they matched down to the inch. Together they began mapping it, overlaying 180 years of design data. What emerged was not a conspiracy, but a lineage, an ideology built in timber and stone. The illusion of fairness. 2 of everything. used to convince those inside that order meant safety. But behind the symmetry, every path still led to a single point of surveillance. Naomi started calling it the paradox of reflection. How systems that promise equality so often enforce control. Her research wasn't about ghosts, it was about inheritance. The same logic that governed a plantation had evolved into the architecture of the modern mind. Late one night, Reuben looked over the composite plans and said quietly, "You realize this isn't history anymore. It's policy." Naomi didn't answer. She simply drew a final line across the page, dividing left from right, and wrote beneath it, "Control is never an accident." Reuben Glass had always believed buildings told the truth about their builders. He'd spent a lifetime designing rehabilitation facilities, institutions built on the promise of reform. But once Naomi showed him the pattern, he began to see repetition everywhere. Public schools, divided into left and right wings, courthouse steps built in perfect symmetry, even office cubicles aligned like mirrored cells. Every space designed to appear neutral, balanced, and efficient. But symmetry, he realized, was never neutral. It was a system for alignment, for training people to behave predictably within mirrored order. They traced the origin of the modern plans to a Reconstruction-era architect named Elias Monroe, a government surveyor who worked under the Freedmen's Bureau. On paper, Monroe built schools for newly freed black children. In reality, his surviving correspondence revealed that he was experimenting with environmental normalization, layouts meant to induce civility through spatial repetition. The plans were nearly identical to Bell River's. Monroe had apprenticed under one of Colonel Sutton's business partners before the war. The same geometric ratios resurfaced in northern factories during the early 1900s, then again in military barracks and psychiatric hospitals. It wasn't just the South. The blueprint had gone national. Reuben found a 1942 memo from the War Department referencing Sutton equilibrium design as a model for maintaining discipline among soldiers. The language was clinical, but the message was clear as architecture, as behavioral governance. Naomi's discovery shifted from curiosity to threat when their shared database was hacked. A month's worth of research vanished overnight, replaced by a single sentence typed across every document. "The pattern serves order." She tried to trace the breach, but found no entry logs, no IP trail. The deletion had come from inside the university's own servers. That night, Naomi wrote in her journal, "Maybe it's not that they're hiding it. Maybe they've just built it so deep into our walls that we stopped noticing." Reuben stared at the mirror opposite his desk. Standard issue, industrial glass. Two faces, one older, one younger, both framed by fluorescent light. "They taught us to build obedience," he said quietly, "and we called it design." Outside, in the city grid below, the lights of identical windows blinked in perfect synchrony. The Bell River symmetry was no longer buried in history. It had become the shape of civilization itself. Naomi didn't sleep much after the breach. She started printing everything, blueprints, letters, even her own emails, and storing them in an off-campus storage unit. Reuben called it paranoia. She called it preservation, because history, she'd learned, is only as safe as the people who control its archives. When the University Ethics Board summoned her to discuss data integrity concerns, the tone was polite but final. Her grant was suspended pending review. The committee cited methodological irregularities and unsupported connections between historic and contemporary structures. Yet two of the board members were listed as consultants for Armitage Design Group, a firm contracted by several federal agencies. Armitage's specialty correctional architecture, its promotional materials praised the heritage of early Southern craftsmanship, and featured design sketches eerily similar to the Sutton blueprints. Naomi's request for transparency went unanswered. Instead, she received an email from an anonymous address. If you want proof of lineage, check the Armitage Archives mobile office, basement level. Reuben tried to stop her. He'd seen what happened to whistleblowers who went digging into old contracts. But curiosity, once awakened, never sleeps. 2 nights later she drove south. The Armitage building, built in 1954, stood like every mid-century government structure. Clean lines, balanced windows, perfect symmetry. The lobby smelled of dust and old stone. In the basement, she found the filing room exactly as described, metal cabinets arranged in mirrored rows. She pulled one open. Construction manifests, requisitions, sealed envelopes, then a single folder marked Bell River Initiative 1948. Inside were photographs of floor plans, correspondence between Armitage and the State Department of Public Works, and one chilling memo: continuance principles remain viable for institutional management. Modern application ensures social stability through architectural balance. Maintain discretion. The memo was signed with initials E.M., Elias Monroe's descendant. Naomi realized then that the pattern wasn't mythic or mystical, it was bureaucratic. It survived not through ritual, but through policy updates, family firms, and academic citations. Control disguised as heritage. She photocopied everything and left before dawn. Reuben was waiting when she returned, eyes hollow from worry. He looked at the copies spread across her table and whispered, "You found it, didn't you?" Naomi nodded. "It's still being built." Outside her apartment, a construction crew worked under floodlights, pouring concrete for a new government annex. 2 wings, central corridor, perfectly symmetrical. Naomi thought exposure would be simply publish, present, make the evidence undeniable. But the deeper she reached into Armitage's archives, the more resistance hardened around her. Emails bounced back, her departmental access vanished, and her supervisor, once supportive, advised her to let the past rest. Within weeks, rumors circulated that her research involved speculative conspiracies and unethical data handling. It was an elegant silencing, polite, procedural final. Reuben, meanwhile, was fading. His health had been fragile for years, and the stress of their discovery seemed to accelerate it. Yet even from his hospital bed, he urged Naomi to persist. "They'll call it design," he said, "but what they're protecting is control." Determined, Naomi turned to journalists. Most ignored her. One, an investigative reporter named Theo Carr, agreed to meet. She showed him the photocopies, Bell River Initiative memos, floor plans, the Monroe lineage. Theo listened quietly, then asked a single question: "If they're still using this, can you prove it affects people?" That question consumed her. She began photographing public spaces, courthouses, dormitories, prisons, even shopping malls. Every structure followed the same hidden geometry. 2 entrances, central line, reflective symmetry. In each, human movement followed identical paths, orderly, predictable, compliant. It wasn't superstition. It was environmental psychology. She compared modern blueprints to the Sutton plans. The ratios matched within millimeters. Architects spoke of aesthetic balance, but the outcome was always behavioral alignment. People moved where space told them to move. They saw themselves reflected, equal, mirrored, and mistook that illusion for freedom. When Theo's article finally appeared, it was buried online under Urban Design Think Pieces. The comment section dismissed it as paranoia. Armitage issued a statement denying all historical ties. Still, Naomi noticed something unsettling within days. The article disappeared entirely, links redirecting to a 440-page not found. Reuben died 2 weeks later. His last words to her were faint but clear: "They'll keep building. It's how they stay invisible." At the funeral, Naomi looked at the rows of identical chairs, the mirrored windows of the chapel, and felt a cold understanding settle in. The pattern wasn't hidden. It was everywhere, repeated so often it became the background of modern life. And for the first time, she wondered whether uncovering it had ever been her idea at all. Theo Carr didn't believe in patterns. Not at first. He'd built his career exposing political fraud and data scandals, where motive always came with a paper trail. But after Ruben's funeral, something about Naomi's quiet conviction stayed with him. Her grief wasn't hysteria, it was recognition. He began to recheck her claims, starting with Armitage's current contracts. What he found wasn't illegal, just invisible. The company had diversified, renaming itself Arametis Group in 1999. Its subsidiaries held government bids for everything from school construction to urban redevelopment. The documents were public, but what drew Theo's attention was the consistency. Every new civic building followed the same twin-wing layout, the same balanced corridor principles. Even the digital mock-ups mirrored themselves perfectly when flipped along the central axis. It was Bell River rendered in glass and steel. He visited one of the newly opened juvenile centers outside Atlanta, designed by Arametis. The facility guide proudly explained that the structure encouraged calm through symmetry. Standing in the center hall, Theo noticed something subtle. You could see every corridor from one vantage point, every door, every movement reflected down a mirrored line. No shadows, no hiding. Supervision efficiency, the guide called it. Control without confrontation. When Theo published his findings, they disappeared faster than Naomi's. Editors pulled the piece within 24 hours, citing legal sensitivities. A quiet message arrived in his inbox. Certain designs are protected under national security. No sender, no trace. He reached out to Naomi again, but her number was disconnected. Her university page was gone, her office cleared out. A colleague mentioned she'd taken extended leave, overseas, though no one knew where. Late that night, Theo sat in his apartment staring at the city skyline. From a distance, the grid shimmered with architectural precision. Rows of towers in mirrored alignment. Perfect order, perfect reflection. He suddenly understood what Naomi had tried to tell him. The pattern wasn't about belief. It was infrastructure. It had scaled from plantations to prisons to skylines, from physical symmetry to algorithmic one. He turned off the light and saw his own reflection in the window. Two identical faces staring back. For a brief second, he couldn't tell which one was real.